What happens when the man who built the empire finally walks into its forgotten corner, only to find it collapsing from within? The rain came down in soft, rhythmic sheets, tapping against the windshield of Alistair Boone's aging black sedan. Wipers moved in slow, lazy arcs, smearing water across the glass, blurring the outline of a place he once believed in. Through the fogged pane, the crooked neon sign of the Crescent Diner pulsed erratically, casting a faint, dying glow. It reminded him of a performer long past their prime, desperately clinging to the applause that had faded years ago. Once a cherished gem in this sleepy corner of Austin, the diner had been a sanctuary of warmth, home-cooked meals, familiar faces, laughter tucked between orders of pancakes and black coffee. Now, it was something else entirely, a hollow shell dressed in nostalgia. Alistair had read the numbers, revenue plummeting, staff turnover rising like floodwater, and customer complaints stacking up like unpaid bills, but no spreadsheet could capture the feeling of decay he saw now, the loss of soul. Inside, employees moved like shadows, slow, exhausted, as if the walls themselves were draining their will to stand. The atmosphere looked thick, like the air before a storm. A few customers sat scattered across the booths, eyes on their cold coffee or half-eaten meals, the spark of comfort replaced by the dull ache of habit. It wasn't just a failing business, it was a dying heart. Alistair leaned back in the driver's seat, exhaling sharply, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the steering wheel. Tonight, he wasn't the CEO of Boone Enterprises. There were no handlers, no shareholders, no camera crews capturing the fall. Just him, alone, haunted by what this place had become. If he was going to fix it, he had to understand it, not from behind a desk, but from the floor among the people. He had done it before, in the early days when the dream still had dirt under its fingernails. But that was a lifetime ago. Movement near the entrance caught his eye. A man in a torn coat stood shivering at the doorway, soaked to the bone, shoes squishing softly against the pavement. He paused, uncertain, the weight of rejection already stooping his shoulders. Alistair knew that look. Knew what it meant to ask for kindness when you expected none. The man shuffled inside, eyes low, hands trembling slightly. He barely had time to speak before a sharp voice cut through the heavy air. "Get out." The words snapped like a whip. Alistair's gaze shifted to the source, Dennis Crowley. The name had been circled in his reports, highlighted, underlined. 3 years managing this location and running it straight into the ground. Authoritarian, numbers-driven, blind to the human cost. The kind of man who believed morale was an expense, not an investment. The homeless man, Otis, Alistair would later learn, raised his hands, palms up in peace. "Just wanted a glass of water," he said, voice thin. Dennis scoffed. "We're not a shelter. Get out before I call the cops." The room went still. Chatter halted. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Eyes dropped. At the counter, a waitress, Maribel, the name tag read, gripped her order pad tightly, lips parting in protest. But the words, whatever they were, dissolved before they reached her tongue. She looked at Dennis, then Otis, then down again. Defeated. Otis gave a small nod, shame blooming in his face like a bruise. He turned and walked out, each step echoing with a silence heavier than words. The bell above the door jingled softly as he disappeared into the rain, a hunched figure swallowed by the night. Something twisted in Alistair's chest. That was enough. He turned the key, the engine humming back to life, but he didn't drive away, not truly. Tomorrow he would return, not as the man with the checkbook, not as the owner, but as someone willing to get his hands dirty, someone ready to listen. The next morning the air in Austin was cool and fresh, carrying the fading scent of rain. Alistair stood on the sidewalk outside the diner, The same neon sign buzzing overhead, faint, stubborn, like a machine too tired to stop working. This time he didn't wear the suit. He had on old jeans, a plain button-up, and glasses that slightly changed the sharpness of his eyes. His hair, usually tamed with intention, now fell just slightly out of place, just another man looking for a job. He took a long breath, grounding himself. Inside, the diner was still waking, but already it carried the same weight he had felt the night before. A quiet exhaustion, like even the walls had given up. But he hadn't. Not yet. The morning light filtered weakly through the windows of Crescent Diner, casting a pale gray hue over the chipped linoleum floors and faded booths. A waitress moved through the dining area like a ghost, her rag dragging listlessly across the table, as if each swipe required more energy than she had left. Behind the counter, a tired cook glanced at the wall clock every few minutes, his eyes silently pleading for time to move faster. At the far end of the diner stood Dennis Crowley, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the room like a warden in a crumbling prison. Alistair walked in, his steps deliberate but his demeanor deliberately muted. He approached the counter, standing just close enough to draw Dennis's attention without demanding it. "You hiring?" he asked, voice casual, low. Dennis didn't bother to look up. "You got restaurant experience?" "A bit," Alistair lied. "Worked in a few kitchens. Waited tables back in the day." Now Dennis looked at him, his eyes crawling across Alistair's appearance like a man inspecting a used car. "You ever been fired?" Alistair met his gaze evenly. "No." Dennis's mouth curled slightly. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he shoved a notepad into Alistair's hands. $15 an hour, no benefits. You mess up, you're out. Got it?" Alistair nodded. No application, no paperwork, no questions beyond that. Just a man willing to take anyone, warm and willing. That, more than any report, told Alistair everything. He was immediately thrown into the chaos. "Table 7 needs water. 4 wants their check. Bust those plates. And if I catch you standing around looking lost, don't bother coming back." Alistair moved with quiet precision, eyes open, mind turning. As he worked, he saw it all. Dennis was loud, domineering, constantly shouting orders but never lifting a hand to help. He barked, blamed, and belittled. The staff flinched at his voice. Even the cook in the kitchen worked like a man carrying invisible chains. Then there was Luke. Thin, twitchy, with an oily charm and a permanent grin that never reached his eyes. He clung to Dennis like a shadow, nodding at his every word, laughing at every cruel joke. Alistair watched him pocket money from the tip jar more than once, quick, slick, as if he'd done it 100 times before. The diner didn't run on teamwork. It ran on fear. Employees avoided eye contact, never lingered to chat with customers, and moved like they were waiting to be struck. Alistair knew this pattern well. It wasn't mismanagement. It was toxic control. He'd seen it before, masked in different uniforms. And then came the spark that lit the morning's fire. The man at table 5 called Alistair over, his plate barely touched. "This is cold," he said, voice low but firm. Alistair responded with calm professionalism. "I'll let the kitchen know." But before he could turn, Dennis' voice sliced through the air like a blade. "No need." He strode over, snatched the plate, and held it up for everyone to see. "Hey, Jimmy, our friend here thinks you forgot how to use a stove." The cook, a thick-set man with weariness carved into his posture, froze mid-masha. Dennis didn't wait for a response. "That's coming out of your check," he snapped. The cook's jaw clenched. He said nothing, but his eyes burned with quiet rage. He'd heard this before, endured it. Dennis turned back to the customer with a plastic grin. "We'll get you a fresh one." As he walked off, Alistair's attention shifted again to the register. where Dennis casually slipped a few dollar bills from the counter into his own pocket. No shame, no secrecy, just habit. Alistair's breath left him in a slow, steady stream. There was always someone like Dennis, someone who believed that control came from making others feel small. But even the biggest bullies fell when the foundation beneath them shifted. By the end of his third day, Alistair had mapped the power dynamics of Crescent Diner with precision. He saw how the staff moved, not just out of routine, but out of survival. Heads low, voices soft, mistakes hidden at all costs. Dennis didn't care about customers or cuisine. He cared about margins, numbers, authority. If the service suffered, if tips disappeared, if employees burned out and quit, it didn't matter. There was always another body to replace them. But not everyone had given up. Maribel Soto stood apart, quiet, steady and alert. She helped others when they faltered, whispered guidance to the newest hires, and bore Dennis's wrath with a clenched jaw and trembling hands. She didn't push back, but she protected what little dignity remained in that place. So when Dennis exploded over a simple coffee mix-up, yelling at Maribel in front of everyone, Alistair made a choice. "She didn't get the order wrong," he said evenly. Dennis froze mid-rant. "What?" "I saw the slip. It wasn't her mistake." For a heartbeat, the diner went utterly silent. All motion ceased. Maribel stood like stone beside him, eyes wide in disbelief. Dennis turned slowly. "Well, would you look at that? The new guy thinks he's got a voice." Alistair shrugged. "I just don't think it's fair to blame people when it's not their fault." Dennis's smirk faded, replaced with something darker. But then, unexpectedly, he let out a low laugh. "You'll fit right in." He turned back to Maribel. "Get back to work." She nodded and moved quickly, but as she passed Alistair, he saw something shift in her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but gratitude. In the days that followed, something subtle began to change. Employees who once moved like ghosts started looking up when Alistair passed. Nods turned into whispered greetings. Some even offered quiet thanks, careful not to be seen. It wasn't rebellion, but it was the first breath of life the place had seen in months. And then came the moment that changed everything. During a slow hour between shifts, Maribel stepped outside, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry weeks of exhaustion. Alistair followed, resting beside her against a brick wall, silence folding around them like a shared secret. The shift had begun, not just in the diner, but in the people. And Alistair knew this was only the beginning. For a long moment they stood in silence under the gray Texas sky, the hum of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves the only sounds between them. Maribel's arms were folded tightly across her chest, her eyes fixed on the empty parking lot, as if searching for something she couldn't name. "You shouldn't have done that," she said at last, her voice flat but not emotionless. Alistair didn't ask what she meant, he knew, but still he responded with a simple why. She sighed, the kind of breath that carries years of disappointment. "Because now Dennis is watching you." Alistair's eyes followed a thin beam of sunlight crawling across the sidewalk, the day inching toward dusk. "Good," he replied softly. Maribel turned toward him, brows drawn. "You don't get it." There was frustration in her voice, but also something softer, concern. "Others have tried, they've spoken up, filed complaints, even reached out to corporate. Nothing changes." That caught his attention. He looked at her fully now, reading the resignation in her expression. "Well, not." She hesitated, as if weighing whether the truth was worth the risk. "He's got someone protecting him, higher up. I don't know who, but people have lost their jobs for less than what you did today." There was a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, Or warning. Alistair nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning," he said quietly. "But I'm not going anywhere." For a moment she simply looked at him. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. The first true crack in her guarded exterior. Dennis didn't wait long to retaliate. The next shift, Alistair was thrown into the grinder, scrubbing grease off ancient kitchen floors, hauling trays that should have been split between two people, juggling double the tables, while Luke, smug and untouched, leaned against counters with a crooked grin. But Alistair didn't complain. He didn't resist. Every insult, every overburdened task, every pointed slight, it was data. It was fuel. He was watching, listening, building the case, 1 minute at a time. And then, the unexpected walked through the door. The corporate inspector. He wore business casual, carried a clipboard, and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But to Dennis, he was everything. In an instant, the tyrant vanished. In his place stood a charming, deferential manager, smiling, attentive, almost nauseatingly polished. "Welcome. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you," Dennis purred, clapping his hands as he turned to the staff. "All right, folks, let's make sure we're on our A game today." Alistair saw the way the employees tensed, their spines straightening out of instinct. They'd been here before. The command to perform had been issued, but the cracks were too deep to patch in a day. The place was understaffed, the systems disorganized, the energy brittle. And then it happened. One of the new waiters, still learning the ropes, spilled a drink across a customer's table. It wasn't catastrophic, but Dennis reacted like it was arson. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, his voice echoing across the diner. The kid stammered, eyes wide. I didn't mean..." Dennis bore down like a storm, and in front of the inspector no less. Alistair felt his chest tighten. He glanced at Maribel, who looked frozen, and the other staff, stiff with dread. And then, without thinking, he stepped forward. "That's enough." The room snapped to silence. Dennis turned, disbelief painted across his face. "What did you just say?" "I said that's enough," Alistair repeated, his tone steady. It was an accident. Every eye was on them. The inspector tilted his head, interested. Dennis's jaw worked furiously, but no words came. Something had shifted, and he knew it. The next day, the bomb dropped. "Dining room, back room now," Dennis's voice thundered, summoning every employee. The staff moved with dread. Alistair followed, calm, composed. The air in the cramped break room was electric with unease. Dennis stood at the front, arms crossed, smirk in place, but his eyes betrayed a growing edge of desperation. "I'm not going to waste your time," he began, voice sharp. "Some of you think you can challenge me. I'm here to remind you, you can't." His eyes locked on Alistair. "And that brings me to you." Alistair didn't blink. "You've been here, what, a week, and already you're meddling, acting like you know better than the rest of us? Let me save you the trouble." Dennis grinned. "You're fired." Gasps. A few employees exchanged glances, some relieved it wasn't them, others too shocked to react, but Maribel's fists clenched at her sides. And Alistair smiled. He took off his glasses, folded them neatly, and slid them into his pocket. Then he stepped forward. "I think you might want to reconsider that." Dennis blinked. "What?" I said. Alistair straightened, letting the mask fall away. "You might want to reconsider firing me." The room was stone silent. Dennis barked a bitter laugh. "Why the hell would I?" "Because," Alistair interrupted, voice like granite, "I own this place." The words landed like thunder. For a second, Dennis didn't seem to understand. Then his face went pale. Alistair reached into his back pocket and unfolded a document. "This," he said, raising it for everyone to see, "is a full audit of Crescent Diner for the past 12 months. I've been documenting everything since I got here. And Dennis, you've been busy." Dennis opened his mouth. No sound came out. "You've stolen from the tip jar. We have proof. You've created a hostile workplace. Staff complaints vanish mysteriously, and morale is in the gutter. And then there's the misappropriation of company funds, cutting corners to pad your own pocket while this place crumbles." Alistair's eyes didn't waver. "You've bullied, threatened, and manipulated your way into thinking you were untouchable. But this ends today." Dennis's bravado cracked at last. His face paled, the swagger in his voice faltering. That's all documented?" Alistair didn't let the silence linger. "Every word," he replied smoothly, holding Dennis's gaze. "I made sure of it." A flicker of panic crossed Dennis's face, and that's when Maribel stepped forward. Her voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the tension like sunlight through a storm. "I can confirm everything he just said." Then another voice joined hers, and then another. Voices that had been quieted for months, years, finally spoke. The tide had turned, not with violence, but with truth. Dennis took a shaky step back, his desperation rising. "You're just going to believe him? Over me? He's been here a week. He doesn't even know how this place works." "He's the only one who actually gave a damn," Maribel snapped, her voice rising with the weight of long-suppressed anger. Silence fell again. Then Alistair folded the document and placed it neatly in his pocket. "Dennis," he said with quiet finality, "you're fired." Dennis's breath came in fast, shallow puffs. You can't do that." Alistair tilted his head slightly. "I just did." Two uniformed security officers stepped through the doorway. Ironically, the same ones Dennis once used to intimidate staff. Only this time, they weren't here for show. They were here for him. Dennis had no more fight in him. He cast one last venomous glance toward Alistair, then pushed past the guards. His footsteps echoed into silence. And then the door swung shut behind him. "Oh!" For a long moment, the diner was completely still. Then clap. Maribel. Once. Twice. And then slowly the others joined in. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a celebration. It was something heavier, deeper. Relief, the kind that fills your lungs after nearly drowning. Alistair exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with something like peace. He turned to Maribel. "This place needs a new manager," he said, voice low but resolute. Her eyes widened, disbelief flooding her expression. "Me?" "You've already been doing the job for years," he said with a small smile. "Might as well make it official." Anahil, Maribel's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Are you serious?" Alistair nodded. "If you want it, it's yours." She looked around. The faces of her co-workers, the people who had stood shoulder to shoulder with her through every hard shift and cruel reprimand. Slowly, she straightened her spine. "I'll do it," she said, her voice strong. Alistair smiled. "Then let's get to work." That evening, as the city's hum softened into twilight, Alistair stepped outside into the cool, clean air. The neon sign of Crescent Diner cast a soft amber glow onto the damp pavement. The world around them moved on, oblivious. But here, something important had shifted. His gaze drifted to the sidewalk. There, just outside the diner's reach, stood Otis Rucker, the same man who had once been turned away, soaked and shivering, a man who had been denied even the smallest gesture of dignity. He stood hesitantly, posture hunched, hands buried in the pockets of a jacket that had seen too many winters. He didn't move. He wasn't sure if he was welcome, but he didn't have to wait long. From the doorway, Maribel stepped out. No hesitation, no performance. She simply walked to the nearest booth by the window and placed a hand gently on the back of a chair. "Come on in," she said, her voice warm and certain. "Have a seat." Otis's fingers twitched at his sides. He looked at her like someone who'd been burned too many times to trust the flame. "I don't want to cause trouble," he murmured, voice hoarse. "You're not," Maribel replied. "You're a guest here, just like anyone else." Otis hesitated, emotions warring behind tired eyes, but finally he stepped forward. She guided him to the table and without another word disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned with a hot plate of food, real food, made with care, and a glass of water. No fanfare, no pity, just kindness. Alistair watched from a distance, the image searing into him like truth. Otis stared at the food, his breath catching. Then, slowly, he picked up the fork and took a bite. Something subtle shifted in his face. Relief. A small surrender to hope. Maribel didn't linger. She gave the table a soft pat and said, "Take your time," before heading back inside. Alistair stood in the shadows, the quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Crescent Diner wasn't perfect. It would never be easy. But it was on its way to becoming something better. And that was enough for now. Inside, the air still buzzed with unresolved tension. Not everyone was celebrating. Luke, the ever-loyal shadow of Dennis, stood with arms crossed, bitterness carved into every line of his body. "This is a mistake," he spat. "You think getting rid of Dennis fixes everything? You have no idea how close we were to shutting down." Some staff members glanced around, uncertain. Heel did what he had to do, Luke went on. "Yeah, he was tough, but he kept this place running. Without him, we wouldn't have had jobs." Maribel stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. "Jobs don't mean anything if you're treated like garbage." Luke scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You've got your little promotion now." "I'm not doing this for me," she said flatly, "and you know it." She turned to the room. "We didn't fall apart because Dennis didn't cut enough corners. We fell apart because he poisoned this place from the inside. Customers left, good people quit, and the ones who stayed afraid." Luke's jaw tightened, but he had no reply. The truth had been spoken. But Dennis wasn't done. As he left, he hurled one last grenade behind him. "I'll be filing a lawsuit, wrongful termination. You think this was bad for business? Wait until we go to court." Then, with a smug grin, he added, "You think I was the problem? I only did what Boone Hospitality expects. Every manager cuts costs, squeezes labor. That's how the system works. The only difference is I got caught." His words hung heavy, and they hit Alistair harder than anyone, because they weren't entirely false. Alistair had spent years behind glass walls and boardrooms, trusting in spreadsheets and systems, believing that if the numbers worked, the people must be fine. Now he saw the truth. It wasn't just this diner, it was all of them. He stepped forward, eyes locked on Dennis. "You're right." The room stilled. "This isn't just about you, it's about everything, and I'm going to fix it." Dennis sneered. "Fix it? You can't fix a system built to drain people dry." Alistair met his gaze. "Maybe that's how your business worked," he said, voice unwavering. "But not mine." He turned to the staff. "Starting today, this diner, and every one of our restaurants, changes. No more cutting costs at the expense of people. No more fear. No more managers who think authority is a weapon. We either do better or we don't do it at all." And with that, the future of Crescent Diner began, rooted in something stronger than profit. In people. A heavy silence hung in the diner, broken only by the creak of an old chair as an elderly woman by the window slowly pushed her coffee aside. Her hands, weathered but steady, rested on the table. Her gaze, wise, unwavering, settled on Alistair. "I've been coming here for 20 years, she began, her voice soft but commanding, the kind of voice that carried not just age, but experience. "And let me tell you something, young man, it was never about the prices, or even the food. It was about the people, the ones who knew your name before you said it, who remembered your grandkids' birthdays, who took a minute to ask how your husband's doing, even if you didn't say a word. That's why I kept coming back." She let the silence return, letting the weight of her words settle. "You fix that," she added, her voice gentle yet unyielding, "and you'll fix this place." Alistair met her gaze, something clicking deep inside. She wasn't just talking about Crescent Diner. She was talking about every place that had forgotten what mattered. Dennis had no words left, no mask to hide behind, no more power. He stormed out, muttering curses to the wind, but no one followed. Not even Luke. For a moment Luke lingered, his jaw tight, his eyes darting across the room as if searching for something to anchor him. But he found none. The walls he had leaned on had crumbled, and so, with a bitter shake of his head, he left. But the others, they stayed. And in the quiet that followed, something new bloomed. Not joy. Not yet, but something close. Alistair turned to Maribel. "You ready for this?" She took a long breath. Her eyes flicked to the counter, then to the faces around her. People who had once been co-workers but were now looking at her as something more. A leader. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." Alistair gave a nod, quiet and approving. "Then let's get to work." But while most thought Dennis was finally gone, his story wasn't finished. Some men don't fade. They fester. In the dead of night, long after the last customer had left and the lights had dimmed, Dennis returned. The diner was still, bathed in the cold blue hume of refrigeration units. Floorboards groaned beneath his feet like ghosts, warning him away. But he wasn't afraid. He knew this building better than anyone, and more importantly, he knew how to hurt it. He moved quickly, methodically, pulling open drawers, stuffing documents into a worn leather bag, payroll records, vendor invoices, private employee notes, anything he could twist into ammunition. And before he left, he placed one last message on Maribel's desk. A crumpled note scrawled in heavy ink. "Don't think you've won." Like a shadow, he vanished back into the night. The next morning, Crescent Diner opened to chaos. 3 health inspectors showed up at the door, clipboards in hand, faces blank with the dullness of routine bureaucracy. "Routine check," one said, his voice flat. Maribel frowned. "We didn't request an inspection." The inspectors pushed past her, scanning every surface, lifting containers, opening freezers. Employees watched, bewildered. Then came the accusations. Rodents in storage, spoiled meat, mold in the sinks, each more absurd than the last. Maribel's voice shook as she protested. This isn't right. We're clean, we've always been clean." But it didn't matter. A violation notice, bold, yellow, unforgiving, was taped to the front window. Customers turned away, murmuring with suspicion. Regulars stared through the glass, confused, disappointed. Some shook their heads, others simply left. Inside, uncertainty spread like wildfire. Luke, arms crossed, smirked from the corner. "I told you," he said. "You fire Dennis, you break the place." Maribel turned sharply. "You seriously believe this wasn't him?" Luke shrugged. Even if it was, this wouldn't have happened if he was still in charge. Some employees murmured in agreement. Others looked to Alistair, searching for reassurance he hadn't yet given. The trust he'd worked so hard to build was starting to crack. He needed proof, fast. That night, while the city slept, Alistair made calls. And it didn't take long. A former manager from another Boone hospitality branch picked up after 2 rings. "Crowley," the voice said. "Yeah, we had him before you did." "What happened?" Alistair asked. The man let out a bitter laugh. "Same thing you're dealing with now. He played king until we cut him loose. Then he tried to burn it all down on his way out." Alistair's chest tightened. "How?" "Sabotage. Faked violations. Tampered with records. Nearly shut us down before we caught it." By the next morning, Alistair had everything he needed. With Boone Hospitality's legal team at his side, they reviewed security footage. External cameras Dennis had forgotten. There it was, clear footage of Dennis slipping in after hours, entering the storage room, manipulating inventory. It wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated sabotage, and it was all on tape. Within days, legal action followed. Dennis Crawley was arrested, fraud, destruction of business property, criminal tampering. His last power move had failed. Spectacularly. And finally, the weight that had hung over Crescent Diner for so long was lifted. But even as justice was served, the aftermath lingered. Not everyone had stayed. Some employees, worn thin by years of abuse and the recent chaos, walked away. They were done gambling their stability on hope. Luke, too, left without a word, unable or unwilling to embrace the new order. But those who remained, they weren't just staff anymore. They were believers. Maribel was one of them. She had spent years watching good people break, wondering if things would ever change, and now, with the title of manager officially hers, she didn't rise for the power. She rose to protect the change they had fought for, to make sure Crescent Diner never fell back into darkness again. And slowly, day by day, the transformation began. Gone was the fear. Gone was the silence. In its place, laughter returned. Voices rose, not in argument, but in collaboration. Employees stopped rushing through shifts like ghosts. They shared ideas. They supported each other. They smiled. Crescent Diner was still under repair, but it was breathing again. Live again. Not because it was perfect, but because its people mattered. And now, they finally knew it. In the months that followed, something profound took root at Crescent Diner. It wasn't built on marketing gimmicks or promotional discounts. It wasn't a result of stricter rules or more aggressive scheduling. The transformation happened because the people inside those 4 walls started to believe again. Believe in each other, in the work, in what a place like this could mean when compassion was part of the recipe. Service improved not out of obligation but from pride. Pride in the job, pride in the team, pride in being part of something that finally felt human. And customers noticed. They returned not just for pancakes or coffee, but for the small things. A remembered name, a smile that meant it, a sense of being seen. For the first time in a long time, Crescent Diner wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. One quiet afternoon, the bell above the door gave a soft jingle. A familiar figure stepped inside, pausing just shy of the threshold. Otis Rucker. He had once been turned away in the rain, dismissed like a problem no one wanted to deal with. But now, Maribel saw him immediately. Her face lit up with recognition and warmth. She walked toward him, no hesitation, no judgment, just kindness. "Come on in," she said gently, pulling out a chair near the window. "Have a seat." Otis hesitated for a breath, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone to stop him. "I don't want to be a burden," he said softly. "You're not," Maribel replied. "You belong here, just like everyone else." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned minutes later with a plate of hot, freshly made food. No shortcuts, no scraps, just care. She placed it before him with a cup of coffee, the steam rising in slow swirls between them. Otis stared at the meal, hands twitching slightly. Then, slowly, he picked up the fork. From across the diner, Alistair watched. This moment wasn't about quarterly earnings or saving face. It was about restoring something far more valuable. Dignity. And in that instant, he knew. This was only the beginning. 6 months passed. The transformation was no longer a hope. It was real. The dread that once gripped the diner like a vice was gone. Conversations now flowed freely. Laughter, which had once been a stranger, was part of the daily rhythm. Maribel Soto, now the official manager, moved with the kind of ease that only came from doing what you were meant to do. She greeted regulars with familiarity, checked in on her team with genuine care, and made sure no one felt invisible. The staff no longer tiptoed through their shifts. They worked together, like a family. Crescent Diner had become more than a job site. It was a home, a sanctuary, and the customers felt it. Business flourished not from flashy rebrands, but because people wanted to be there. They felt welcomed, remembered, respected. Across the street, Alistair Boone stood in the golden hue of evening, watching the place he had once feared was lost. He had seen it at its darkest. Now he saw its light. His eyes met the eyes of the 6 men who had survived to find that this was bigger than one restaurant. The ripple effect had started. Boone hospitality was evolving. Other locations were following Crescent's lead. Toxic managers were being held accountable. Employees, once silent, now spoke up. And in that moment a quiet thought settled in Alistair's mind. Can power and compassion coexist? The answer was right in front of him. The door swung open again. The bell chimed. Otis Rucker walked in, not hesitantly, not unsure. He moved with purpose. In his hands was a fresh cup of coffee. He made his way through the now bustling diner, past customers engaged in easy conversation, past a staff that no longer flinched at footsteps. He stopped at Alistair's table and gently set the cup down. "The last time you helped me," Otis said, voice steady. "This time, let me return the favor." Alistair looked up at the man who had once stood trembling in the rain. And then, he smiled. He took the cup, felt its warmth in his hands, and raised it slightly. "The new beginnings," he said. Otis nodded, his own smile full of quiet knowing. "To good people." That night, as Alistair stepped outside, he paused beneath the diner's glowing neon sign. The light shimmered off the wet pavement, a soft echo of all they'd been through. I'd hoped he had come here thinking he was the solution, that he was the one who needed to fix something broken. But as he looked back through the glass, saw Maribel laughing with a customer, saw the team working in harmony, he realized the truth. Crescent Diner didn't need him anymore. It belonged to its people now. And that was the real victory. Power without compassion breeds fear. But when leadership is rooted in trust, in dignity, in human decency, real change isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Alistair Boone hadn't just rescued a business. He had reminded everyone, including himself, what it means to matter. So, in the end, what keeps a place alive? Is it profit? Or is it the people behind it? And maybe, just maybe, that answer has been waiting all along.